Good morning, class.
Good morning.
It's channel 2. Yeah, excellent. I'll try that again for the benefit of the internet. Good morning, class.
Good morning.
For all the people watching online, thank you. I heard you this time. Maybe not. We are continuing our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. We are in chapter 7 today. And again, I always feel compelled to do this because reinforcement's good. So, who wrote Ecclesiastes? Shout it out if you know it. Solomon. Young Solomon or older Solomon? Older. At this point in his career, how is Israel doing on the world stage? Good. Good?
Well.
They're doing very well. They're doing 4-car garage good. You know what I mean? Like, would you say that Solomon had to wage a lot of war and was successful, a little war and was successful, no war? Like, where was he on the conflict front?
Wow. Maybe, I don't know. I'm guessing.
Ah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, he didn't. He didn't have to. His father David did all that. And it was for that reason that God said, I love your heart, but I will not let you build the temple for me, even though you're asking, but I will give that honor to your son, Solomon. So early in his career, Solomon built the temple for the Lord. What is the most, or maybe, what did Solomon ask God for before he became king? Why? Why did he ask for wisdom? I know we didn't read that story, but why did he ask for wisdom? If God showed up to you today and said, hey, I'll give you anything, what do you want?
Maybe because David didn't make so many good choices.
Maybe because David didn't make so many good choices. Yeah, well, what were the bad choices that David made?
He killed somebody.
Why did he kill him?
Get his wife.
To get his wife, yeah. He had actually had an extramarital affair with the wife of a general and possibly got her pregnant. And his general came home from the front lines, and David's like, great job, buddy. Go home and enjoy your family time with your wife. And Uriah, the general's like, I can't do that. My men are out there sleeping on the hard ground, and I'm not going to be comfortable in my home while my men are out there, struggling and suffering. And David's like, why are you so nice and smart and good, right? So what David does is he sends it back to the front lines and sends orders that when fighting starts, everybody takes one step back, except Uriah. He didn't get the memo, right? So, David's hope was that Uriah would go home to his wife, and then maybe he could just sweep the whole affair under the rug, and Uriah would think it was his kid, and everything's fine, but it didn't happen that way, right? So that was David's biggest indiscretion, by far. So Solomon, he prays for wisdom. I'll give you the answer to the question I was fishing for earlier. Why did he ask for wisdom? Because he was about to be the king of Israel, and he felt like it was too big a job for him to handle. He said, God, I need wisdom to be a good king to all these people. They need a good king. I can't do that without you. Let's fast forward to Solomon's life. Does Solomon have any struggles? Does he have any downfalls? Does he have any weaknesses? 1,000 women. Yeah. David's downfall, 1 woman. Bruh, did you learn nothing from your dad? Yeah, and we'll talk about that probably because it's in this chapter coming up. And so we will definitely talk about that. Yes, we praise for wisdom. And if we were to chart a graph of Solomon's wisdom, my contention to you as the guy teaching this class is that Solomon is about at his wisest around the time he's praying that prayer, asking for wisdom. Because he knows that he needs God. And God endows him with all sorts of wisdom, right? He is a great judge. You know, people come from all over to watch him hold his court. And, you know, there's that whole, probably the first or second most famous story about Solomon is the Queen of Sheba comes, and there's this dispute between these two women about whose baby it is. And he says, well, cut the baby in half. And one's like, don't do that, just give her the baby. And the other one's like, yeah, cut him in half. And Solomon's like, okay. The one wanted to give the whole baby over, that's the real mom. You know, give the baby to her. Which, you know, in all honesty, and like I said, we didn't study that passage, but I think we often read that as that was him figuring out who the real biological mom is. And maybe so. But the deeper truth is, no, that baby deserves to be with the woman who wants the baby to survive. It doesn't matter who the biological mom is, right? The biological mom is willing to cut the baby in half for spite. She doesn't deserve a baby.
Sort of reminds me of that line from The Equalizer where it says, are you a good man or a bad man? And he said, I'm not sure. And then he helped him.
Yeah.
And the story was that only a good man could say he's not sure.
Yeah. Well, there's a stand-up comedian who does a bit about, like, when you go to the reporters are at the scene of a fire or whatever, and the firemen come out, and they're like, well, what does it feel like to be a hero? And the fireman's always like, I'm not a hero, I'm just a regular guy. And the comedian's like, you have to say that. Heroes have to say that, because if you say, yeah, I'm a hero, then you're not a hero. You have to say I'm not a hero, then you can be the hero.
That's right. That's true.
Yeah, so anyways, the point here being Solomon is very wise, particularly in the ways of the world. He advances well in the way of the world. He also has great insight into God. And he shares quite a bit of it in the scriptures. But it gets crowded out by other stuff. So if we're charting Solomon's wisdom, I'd say he hits a peak right around the time he's asking for wisdom. And then there's a slide off. So he asks for wisdom, he builds God the temple, prays a beautiful prayer about the dedication of the temple, right? And he does a great job as a king, ushering in a time of peace, although that's probably God. Prosperity, although that's probably God. Fame, reputation. He also gets distracted from God. And his heart wanders, and he starts opening himself and his kingdom to idols and idolatry. And as all that's happening, so Solomon's climbing, let's use a ladder. He's climbing the ladder of success, right? And the higher he goes, the emptier he feels. In Ecclesiastes, especially through those first few chapters, we get the story of what that was like for him. He's like, well, I pursued wisdom, and I found despair. And I pursued pleasure, and I found depression. And I pursued achievement, and it felt hollow because I have to give it all away to some knucklehead who comes after me. And as my kingdom and power and everything advanced, but I started to consider my own mortality, I realized I got to hand all this over, and the guy who comes behind me will not be as wise as I am. That's a factual statement, because God said you're going to be the wisest. So then what will happen to the kingdom? And his worst fears really are realized, because the united powerful kingdom of Israel does not survive past his death. He has sons who fight over the throne. The kingdom splits not in half exactly, but there's a north there's a north and a south division, and it never really gets reunited. I'm going to air quotes never. There's a whole story that we can tell about Jesus and what he is doing, what he has done, and what he's going to do, but that's not in the summary of Ecclesiastes. So anyways, Solomon's nearing the end of his life, and he's trying to think back on all this stuff, and he's trying to figure out what matters and what's meaningful. And he's seen it all, and he's done it all, and it all isn't. It's all vanity and chasing after the wind. But I think in his reflections, he remembers those times that didn't feel empty and meaningless. And in his reflections, he remembers when he actually got a good night's sleep and when he actually enjoyed life. And it was the times when he stopped trying, when he stopped limiting his vision to what is under the sun. Anytime he'd lift his eyes up to heaven. And so as a refrain we get in here, you don't look for your value and meaning and fulfillment in wealth, wisdom, or pleasure, or any of those things. You won't find it there. Here's the best you can do. Live your life. But with each day, accepting that life as a gift from God. Each meal, however extravagant or humble, as given to you by the hand of God. Take it all with thanksgiving. And don't forget who God is. Because if God doesn't give you the ability to enjoy life, you won't. If God doesn't give you satisfaction, you won't have it. Hopefully, you guys are hearing this refrain as we read through these scriptures. We are in a section right now that seems to be sort of a rapid-fire wisdom section, kind of like the book of Proverbs, which is not coincidental, seeing as how Solomon wrote Proverbs too. And probably for the same audience, right? Beginning of Proverbs, we hear that he's writing for his son. So we were in chapter 7, and we've talked a little bit in the last couple of weeks about how he talks about how frustration is better than laughter, to which I would say, I mean, it's important to remember chapter 3, which is to say, you have to take the bitter with the sweet. You have to accept it all as a gift from God. There's a saying I've heard, and it's a little bit of a cynical statement about history, but I don't think it's too far off the mark. It goes something like this. Hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. Right? And, you know, as a father, on the one hand, I don't want my child to be subjected to pain or struggle or frustration. It hurts to watch those things happen. But also, as a father who wants to raise a child who is of strong character, who has resilience, who has graciousness, who has patience, those things won't happen unless there is some suffering that is endured and some struggle that is faced and some losses accrued along the way. All those things are important in your formation. And when you understand that about being a parent, and you understand then that God calls himself our Father, and he chooses that language intentionally. I don't know if I've shared this thought with you guys before. It is worth talking about, though. The reason I believe that families exist the reason that God made humans where a father and a mother raise a child, because it could have been anything, right? Like we could just lay eggs and leave them, but that's not God's design for humans, right? Yes?
Yes.
Good, okay. When I throw the softballs, you got to swing, okay? I firmly believe the reason God made humans this way is to help us with a picture of who he is for us. It is also why marriage is what it is. He made it that way to give us a picture of the love Christ has for his people. These were things that God designed, and they weren't arbitrary. All right, so let's go. Let's go, chapter 7. Last week we talked about extortion and bribery and the mafia, I think. We talked about the 80-20, 90-10 rule that, the last 10% is the hardest 10%. That's why bringing something to completion is such a good thing. A project ended is better than a project begun. I've got a handful of projects I'm working on diligently right now, and I've sunk hours and hours and hours into them. And if they do not get done by the deadline, that'll all be for nothing, right? Do not quickly be provoked in your spirit. Talked about God is slow to anger and abounding in love. And I shared with you my belief that most anger that we experience is rooted in self-righteousness. Most anger we experience is because we believe we are being wrongly treated. Sometimes you really are, I'm not saying that that's all anger, but I think oftentimes that is where it lives. We talked about the relative values of wisdom and wealth last week. And if you had to pick one, which one would you rather have?
Wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah. All right, we need to keep going because it's already getting late. So, did we leave off at 13? Somebody who has my official notes? We went through 18. Oh, fantastic.
We talked about extremes.
We did talk about extremes, and the middle path is rarely the simplest one. All right, well then let's just pick up right on 19. Wisdom makes one wise person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. Let's break those apart. They are listed as separate verses in my Bible. Wisdom makes one wise person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. Is that true? Then why does it seem like our government's full of unwise people?
Who wants that job?
Who wants that job? That's a thing, right? What would you do if you were president? Why would I ever want to be president? There is something to that. So I think that there is a sun-down way of looking at this, and I think that there is a looking up toward heaven way of looking at this too, right? So the cynical might say, well, that wise person who is wise in the ways of the world can sort of manipulate things however he wants, and sometimes that's more powerful, right? I'm not saying this is true. I'm not saying it's not true, but there are people who will say, it doesn't matter who sits in the Oval Office. It's the deep state that runs everything, right? Well, who is the deep state? You don't know. And that's the point. Now, is that true? Well, I'm not here to make a statement about that. But what I am here to say is oftentimes the people who are not the face of the thing can exert a lot of influence on the people who are, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen that. What's that?
Maybe they don't really mean it. There's just that your influence is strong.
Yeah. So I think that might be one way of taking this. But let's go a different route. Let's take the idea of wisdom in its purer form, right? Not worldly wisdom, but true wisdom. What's the beginning of true wisdom? The fear of God, right? And if we're talking about that chart of Solomon's wisdom as being he was at his highest when he was relying on God, then think about this passage again. Wisdom makes one wise person more powerful than 10 rulers in the city. How is that? Well, whose power is he relying on? If wisdom really is acknowledging God as sovereign, God is in control, and relying on his power, well, what 10 men can stand up to God? And I think that's a good way of interpreting it because verse 20 comes right on its heels, and it feels as if they're supposed to be related. And it won't make much sense if the kind of wisdom we're talking about is sort of worldly shrewdness. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous. No one does what is right and never sins. It may not look it if you're only looking at what's under the sun, but sin is always foolishness. Sin is always foolishness. Y'all know about the marshmallow experiment they do with the kids, right? Where it's like, okay, I'll put a marshmallow in front of you. Now, you can have this marshmallow, but if you'll wait, whatever it is, 5 minutes, arbitrary time, 5 minutes, I'll come back and I'll give you 2 marshmallows and you can have them both. But if you eat it before I come back, that's it. You get your 1 marshmallow and you're done. If having 2 marshmallows is a mark of wisdom, right? The better thing would be to wait. But what if in taking the data for this experiment, you stopped collecting data at 4 minutes and 59 seconds? Who's going to look more wise? The kid who ate 1 marshmallow or the kid who ate 0 marshmallows? I didn't think this was a hard one.
0?
No, if you stop observing before the 5-minute mark, then the kid who ate the 1 marshmallow is going to look like they made the better choice.
Right.
Yeah? And that's what this whole like under the sun or not under the sun thing is all about. If you limit your view to what's right in front of you, then the way of wickedness may look like it gets ahead. But righteousness takes the long view. And sometimes we forego the short-term, whatever, benefit. Let's call it that. Because the long view is better. All right, so no one on earth is righteous. There is no one on earth who is righteous. No one who does what is right and never sins. Well, there was one guy, but this is before all that. Let's keep going. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. There's a word for this. Grace. Solomon's putting forth here the idea that you should extend grace to other people. But it's rooted in humility. Okay, so if nobody's ever done everything right, that includes you, and you know sometimes you've said things that you regretted, or you've done things that are regrettable. And sometimes people are going to notice and say something about it. You know what? It's okay. You can't take all that to heart, because if you do, you're going to have no relationships and you're going to be paralyzed. All right?
Reminds me, I used to have people come in my office and say, hey, you're not going to believe somebody else on the team. You're not going to believe what this person said about you. And my response to that was always, well, they're probably right. Just to try to
Disarm it.
escalate, because then you get in a situation where if you try to reprimand the person that spoke ill of you,
Yeah.
what you're really doing is reinforcing a lot of negative behaviors.
Yeah.
Like, nobody likes a narc.
Yeah.
Right? And you got to question the motive of the person that would come in there and tell you that to begin with. So I always kind of felt like it was better to just own it than to try to give the narc the
Yep.
power. You know?
Yep. All right, let's keep going. All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise. But this was beyond me. Whatever exists is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? Oh, y'all that are reading along, if you have a different translation than me, would you read out verse 24?
Whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound.
Okay. Anybody else?
What did he say? More what?
He said, whatever
More often, most what?
profound. Anybody else?
Profound.
Profound, yeah. Yeah.
ESV says, that which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out?
Yeah. So this is one of those places where consulting multiple translations kind of maybe helps you have some circumspection. Because there are things I want to say about the passage translated thusly that maybe doesn't hold up in the light of other ways that it might be translated. And that's just the nature of taking things from one language to another. So when you're doing a Bible study and you're trying to do it like a deep, study, consult other reputable translations, NIV, ESV. If you want to, you can go do like a KJV, that's fine. You can do, there's a bunch out there. I wanted to go on a route of talking about how, he knows he doesn't have access to real reality, just the shadows of what reality we get through our senses and all that kind of thing. I'm not sure that's actually what he's saying, though, right? That's just what this particular translation kind of led me to thinking about. There's hints of it, though. But he's saying, this is the wisest man who ever lived, remember? Saying, I wanted to be wise, but wisdom keeps slipping away from me. It's out there. I can't grasp it. Yeah, you know what? Let's use the board. We're going to use the board today. This is an important topic, and we don't talk about it much. I have a million markers. Let's see if I need them right. There we go. All right, so I want to use this word with you. I don't know if that's an A or an E, but we're just going to go with A for now. Somebody can tell me if I'm wrong. Transcendence. Let's also go with, these are not synonymous, but they are related. Or these are mostly synonymous. Okay. It is often said that we live in a post-truth era, or that we live in a post-factual. Post-truth, I think would be a more common way of saying it. There is an idea, and you've heard me preach about this probably, that there's an idea out there that everybody has their own truth, right? And you can't deny someone else's truth. That would be relative or subjective truth. What does that mean for somebody to have their own truth and that you can't intrude on their own truth? What does that mean?
There is no truth.
Ultimately means there is no truth. right? Or at least that everybody's, it means that it's a conflation of opinion and fact. Or I'm trying to be fair about this to the people who hold this opinion. I'll walk you through how you can get there, I think, in a good faith kind of way, but then we're gonna walk it back and get back to Solomon and biblical truth. It goes something like this. Your perspective on the world is going to differ from mine. Your experience is going to differ from mine. How would I know that mine is right and yours is wrong? We both have limited senses. We both have limited ability to understand. And I have no access to what's going on inside of you, which is real and true. And you have no access to what's going on inside of me, which is also real and true. Ergo, I can't tell you that your truth is wrong. And you can't tell me that my truth is wrong. Now, there are some virtues in this perspective. One of which is, at least there should be, a sense of humility in which we value other people as highly as we value ourselves. The way this is often used is actually kind of the opposite. It's used defensively to say, you can't tell me that I'm wrong. The seeds of this are in philosophy that lead down a road to nihilism. We've talked about nihilism before in here and how it's one of the spirits of our time. And because Solomon is addressing it so head on, I think this is a good book for our time. Nihilism is the belief that nothing really matters, nothing really is true, everything's relative. But is that opinion right? Is that opinion true? As a cheap trick, I will say, well, that's a self-defeating argument, because if you say that there is no such thing as objective truth or no absolute truth, you are now making an absolute statement about the universe. And only Sith deal in absolutes. That joke was only for me. Okay, but, right, so that's a self-defeating argument. I don't think that's a really good faith way of going at this, though. But I also don't think it's right. I will say this. I believe that there is a real world. And I believe that there are real truths. And I also believe that I won't necessarily arrive at those on my own. And I think that is the good faith argument that Solomon is making. I have tried very hard to be wise, but wisdom still eludes me. I know it's out there, but I can't seem to get my hands on it. So he acknowledges that there's an absolute truth, that there's an objective truth, but he doesn't seem to be able to master it. The idea that it's out there suggests transcendence. Do y'all know what transcendence means? Have y'all heard this term before? Yeah, it's the idea that there is more out there, that there's something above it all. One of the reasons that people live with a small God in their mind is that they don't allow him to be transcendent. Right? They try and make God governable by their rules. Well, my God wouldn't do that because... Well, no. God is God. He gets to pick. In your heart, you long for something bigger than you. And God is that thing. Why then do we try to make God smaller again? Well, a small God's a lot easier to live with.
A small God is predictable.
A small God is predictable. And yeah, good. A small God's predictable, right? He won't do things outside of my expectation. Good. So the point I want to make with you all is, yeah, we should have the humility to say, I don't understand everything. And my perspective is limited. And I do have my own truth. But that truth isn't maybe quite right. Maybe my truth shouldn't be the gold standard. I'd rather have this. But nobody has this. Except him. You want to know the truth? You won't discover it. It has to be revealed. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And we all live in this real world that operates by the laws that God established, and yet we don't understand it or ourselves, but he does.
So when you say objective truth, that to me that's almost like an oxymoron. Because truth is truth.
Objective truth is different than subjective truth. Subjective truth would be your perspective on it. So that the illustration of like 3 people witness a car accident and they all tell a different story, but they're all giving real facts.
Okay.
That would be the idea of subjective truth.
Okay.
Objective truth is the way God saw the car accident happen. He saw where all the cars were positioned. He knew at what velocity. He knew what the drivers were thinking about. God was not texting. Right, but I'm saying, so like, nobody knows objectively what happened in that car accident other than God. What we do, especially in sort of human things like a court of law trying to decide who's at fault, is we take these different perspectives, these limited perspectives, these subjective angles on the event, and try and composite them into something that's close to the objective truth. Right? You'll never be there 100%. Unless God gives it to you. That's the power of the Word of God, by the way. You want to know the truth? Well, listen to the guy who sees it all and who understands it all. The only one who has the perspective to give you objective truth. Or, in the case of Solomon, his phrasing on this, I kept reaching for wisdom and it kept slipping through my fingers. It's out there and I can't get it. It's too deep. It's far away. God has it. All right, 24, 25. So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, to search out wisdom in the scheme of things, to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. We already talked about earlier that note on wickedness is always foolishness, even if it looks like it has short-term gains. Man. Yeah, we'll take a few minutes. We'll go through this. We'll get to the end of the chapter. 26. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Now, you could say Solomon's talking about his dad, but he's not. No, he's got 999 problems. Yeah. And a woman of God's not one. Yeah. Let's keep reading, and then we'll put some thoughts on this. Look, says the teacher is Solomon. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things, while I was still searching and not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Okay. Important that we understand that Solomon's speaking out of a place of weakness and pain, and he's not speaking absolute truths about men and women, for example. He looked and Out of 1,000 men, he found one upright man. I don't believe he's talking about himself here. And out of 1,000 women, I didn't find one righteous one. Well, first off, consider the women you've surrounded yourself with. He has 1,000 women as a reference sample here. But what about Deborah? What about Ruth? What about Mary? What about Rahab? The Bible has many righteous women. But I do think this is cautionary. Because remember, Solomon's writing principally for his son who will come after him and be king. And, it is difficult, I think, for famous people to have genuine relationships. I mean, everybody's got an agenda. And how do you know if they love you for you or for your position? How do you know if they love you or for what you can give them? I will say for sure, Solomon's warning here has a negative cast to it, but there is a positive version of it, which is to say, find a woman who is righteous. On your whatever, I don't know about online dating profiles, but on your dating profile, likes and dislikes, wickedness and unrighteousness. Right? Likes, a woman who loves God more than me. I guess I'm going to have to stop there for today. So we'll pick it up chapter 8 next time. Thanks for hanging out. We are going to have church here in about 14 minutes, so stick around. Ah.